All right, today is the top fails of the XXL 750, more specifically actually just the BRS WWC Hybrid Method. But really, what makes this tank so much different than that? They were both based on the Hybrid Method, but which one is it?
Yeah, and we've got 10 of our, we're calling them fails, but really it's about the differences between the two, because neither tank is necessarily failing, but there are some very unique differences between this, 100 plus, almost 180 gallons versus this almost 40 gallons. Today you'll find out what those differences are.
Okay, so there's one thing for sure. We would all like the XXL 750 to look as nice as the E-170. This is a much smaller and even simpler tank. So what are the differences between these two tanks as we hunt to try to find the middle ground where we can make both tanks really thrive?
Well, the number one difference is live rock versus dry rock. So 750 XXL started with dry rock and some bacterial supplements. This one started with year-old established live rock, and that's probably, some difference between the success here.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
And so this tank had 1 year old successful rock in it, and it did not have any bacterial blooms and just took off right from the beginning.
Insta-tank almost.
Yeah. So the XXL 750, we dosed some bacteria in the beginning, but just a couple of doses and used dry rock and really didn't understand how much more difficult just dry rock in a bare bottom environment was really going to be. So I don't think that is currently the barrier between, because it's been 15, 16 months now.
It's all live rock.
Yeah, both of them are live rock now. So even if that was the case, it was slowing it down in the beginning. Now, probably at parity, but it's nice to think about and know that going into it for the future tank. All right, so number two is actually a pretty significant difference between these two tanks.
Yeah, that is, just by looking at them, the lighting. So here on the 750 XXL, we have 10 Radion XR15s with diffusers, and on just this little tank, some T5s and a Kessel.
Yeah, it's a pretty big difference. And so there's one thing I'll tell you right now, is that the T5 Kessel mix is like brainless. You plug it in and walk away. It's done.
Yeah.
And so throughout this, I actually called up Victor over at Worldwide Corals and picked his brain as to why these two tanks should be different. And we went through a bunch of this. So you're going to hear a little bit of a feedback, through me. Hopefully I get it right. But this is what he shared about it is, look, you can have total success with LEDs.
Yeah.
You can absolutely have success with T5s and obviously a T5 LED hybrid. This is the difference. It's just harder to do with LEDs. It is not as plug and play. And actually shared a little story with us that was at his shop. They have a super epic tank, and there's a little group of people that love T5s there. And he walked him over and said, how could this tank be any better? And it's only lit with Radions, and they all admitted it couldn't. This tank is awesome.
Pretty awesome.
It's one of the most awesome tanks here. So here's the problem, is just that it's harder to do. So it requires a par meter, requires some knowledge on it, it requires just a little bit more effort to get the spread and all the different things right. Whereas the T5s and LEDs, you just plug them in almost and walk away. The par meter obviously makes it a lot easier, but that super diffused lighting, and this is the thing, this thing has never failed me. So the T5 LED lighting is so brainless and so easy. Anybody could do it, and just a super successful thing. So
LEDs aren't a barrier to success here. It's just a big difference, and this one, tried and true results time and time again. Probably what you would choose in the future.
I think, here's the thing, is you just need to respect the LED, that it requires tuning. It's not just a bunch of sliders and you just plug it in and hope for the best. So respect the LED and how you're going to tune it to a specific result, and that you're providing life support for an organism that thrives on light. It's obviously going to require a little bit of effort. So one of the things we are going to do is go back. I think that WWC has updated their AB plus hybrid type spectrum. I might ask them for that, but also I think we're going to go back through the lighting here and readjust and make sure that we got it right. So it is one thing that we're definitely going to do the XXL 750 to try to find that equilibrium of success. All right, so number three actually is a pretty big difference in the way that elements are managed in these two tanks.
Yeah, that is the difference between the calcium reactor on the 750XXL and the BRS two-part sort of hybrid with the Tropic Marine Sea that we use here, and both simple and stable, kind of like preaching to that WWC BRS Hybrid Method, both with different results, but again, easier to manage on this smaller tank.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure that this could possibly be the cause. But I did talk to Victor about it, and this is what he said. His near and dear to his heart, number one most favorite, Kalkwasser. Super duper easy, adds calcium and alkalinity equal amount.
pH.
It's really affordable. It raises the pH more than either of these other solutions. In fact, the calcium reactor lowers it to some degree. So Kalkwasser is actually his favorite. Super simple, and actually one of my favorites, and probably one of the most overlooked additives out there. But doesn't really keep up with a tank like this one. It's just full of coral sometimes. It actually carries you farther than you might think, and it might actually become close in this tank. But two-part is actually his second favorite because it's so easy. You can manage them independently. You have all the trace elements and stuff that come with it, like built into them. But it's also the most expensive, right? Even in bulk, if at scale, like at his scale, operating a whole facility, it's the most expensive option out there. Calcium reactor, the most affordable for sure at scale.
Yeah, and it lasts, a whole entire jug of media lasts for his tanks way longer, and less maintenance, I guess, too.
Yeah. So a lot of their tanks, remember, were actually Kalkwasser and calcium reactor hybrids. Right. So that fits. Okay. So here's the thing. I don't think that elements would be the difference here, but it could be, right? And here's the thing. Is with the Part C from Tropic Marine, we're adding a little bit of trace elements. And I'm going to explain this in a future video because it actually requires a pretty long, in-depth conversation. But Part C isn't really trace elements, but it creates a stable environment for water changes with the balling method. We're just hybridizing the balling method with Tropic Marine because it's actually just cheaper to use BRS chems and then use Part C. But they actually have a like A and K trace element that you can mix in. Something that we might talk about in the future as well. But between these two, this one actually elevates the pH with the soda ash, where the pH from the calcium reactor is slightly lowered. That could have some impact on the growth. Now, when you look at the pH from both the tanks, it actually isn't very much different. So I don't know if that would be the case for sure. So that is different, but I'm going to tell you this. I don't think it's different enough to go pull the calcium reactor off that tank. I do not think that is the cause between these two tanks. And so we're going to leave it on, and it may be something that we come back to. So number 4 is actually an interesting one, for me at least, anyway.
Yeah, that's the difference between the two on their filter media, specifically mechanical filtration. The 750XXL has the Thieling compact roller mat on it, and the E-170 here, no filtration like that at all. So it's just recycling all of that water through it. It does have a skimmer on it. It does get auto water changes out of the same bin, so both tanks are getting the about the same percentage auto water change, but filter media in this roller mat versus nothing is one of the biggest differences here.
Yeah, and the interesting part in this one is that they both have similar levels of phosphate and nitrate in them, so it isn't that it's pulling all it out. They don't have any available nitrogen or phosphorus source. But it could be just like all that particulate food that's in the water. And this one, because there's no filtration for that,
it's recirculate.
It's just different than that one. And kind of goes against like my desire to pull all the garbage in heavy out. I don't really know though. And so one of the things that he suggested actually was taking the filter roller mat offline.
Just see.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to fix other things first. And then come back to that one. If other things don't solve it, I will come back and take that off and then we'll watch. Because if we do 100 different things all at once, we'll never know which one was really the cause. And I think that adjusting the lighting and a couple other things we're going to talk about today were actually a higher likelihood than keeping the water free of garbage. But it's one of the things in their case, they're feeding like by the hour, right? They had that little timer and they're feeding by the hour. And so they're using filter floss and socks to pull all that stuff out, heavy in, heavy out. but their heavy in is by the hour. And in our case, it just isn't that. So another option might be to add an auto feeder to the tank for some particulate foods, which is something that I very well might consider. I'm not all the way there yet, but we could add like Reef chili to the tank by the hour. You could even dose like amino acids by the hour to the tank. And find a hybrid of that, because we don't have employees walking around, feeding every weekday, 7 days a week, right? So that is a very interesting thing, is the difference between a roller mat, which is really good at pulling that stuff out in real time, and actually not pulling it out at all. All right, so number 5 is actually not the differences between these two tanks, but again, something I just mentioned is a difference between what WWC does in feeding and what we do here.
Yeah, and in feeding, you were just saying it. We don't feed every single hour. On the hour, I think he gets, 750 gets a couple squirts a day, twice a day. Sometimes through there he'll walk by, but that's really all it's it. And it's Monday through Friday, so Saturday and Sundays are out. There's no auto feeders, like you said, and big difference between what they're putting in and what the fish waste is producing, and how that produces results for them.
So, but these two tanks actually are fed a pretty similar amount, considering their tank size and the resulting, waste that comes out of it. So, I don't think that we need to up our feeding, but it was something that we should think about. All right, so number 6 is actually something we learned from the BRS 160 and then applied it to this tank.
Yeah, this one, like I said, is turning me into a believer of the KZ solutions, and that, we had it on the BRS 160 early in its infancy. It worked really well. Did a few method changes to the 160, brought the KZ solutions back, like the amino acids, LPS aminos and things, and just color, growth, all this. So actually, Josh came and said, can we use it on this E-170? So we started using it here, and it hasn't migrated yet over to the 750.
That was actually the big thing for me, is it was the person that actually takes care of this tank, being Josh, came to me and said, hey man, can I start dosing that stuff to here, because it's working so well in the 160? And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess, why not? And man, the coloration, there's just no question. Like, I start adding in some of the missing nutrients, the building blocks of protein and stuff with aminos, and all of a sudden, like, the results follow.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that we didn't do it on the XXL 750, because now there's the opportunity to start dosing it over there and see if the similar results follow over there as well. So that is absolutely something we're going to do. I believe what we're dosing is the sponge power, the coral vitalizer, the SPS, or just amino concentrate, LPS aminos, the coral booster, and the flatworm stop over there. I'll double check all those, and we'll put it in the comments of the video so you can see them.
Yeah.
But those are the things that we're dosing to this tank, and we're going to apply it over to the XXL 750 to make sure that you can see repeatable results, because it's pretty awesome, the results over here. All right, so number 7 is actually a big issue that we're still struggling with to some degree, but I don't know. It was just my own fault, actually.
Yeah, and this is pests, specifically Aptasia. And I actually think that this one is a big hindrance to growth on the 750, because so we scraped some Korallen to get it started in the 750. It had Aptasia on it. And next thing you know, the tank has just exploded in Aptasia, much like we had on the BRS 160, but we solved that, and so we're back in a better place there. Just working on it here on the 750, but the stinging nature of the Aptasia being so close and actually growing in some of the crevices of the SPS just makes it just not want to grow be as happy and healthy as it could be. So
Aptasia is always a problem, especially in an environment where you feed a lot, because they capture the food too and really thrive. All right, so what I did in this case is I went to the 160, and there's a big crust of Korallen in the back, and there's a big chunk I can just scrape off, and it comes off in sheets. Visibly didn't have any Aptasia on it, and I felt like, this is reasonably safe. Shook off all the water, brought it there, crushed it up, put it in there. And I introduced Aptasia, of course. I'll never do that again, I hope. Anyway, in this one, we actually just took some Korallen algae out of the tank right next door to it. And we didn't have that problem. And also what we did is we put a Aptasia eating filefish in there from the beginning. So even if there was some in there, he probably found them and ate them. And they might even be in there, and we just don't know it because he keeps them at bay. So one of the things we did is we took the Aptasia eating filefish out of the 160, who loves to mow that stuff down, and we actually moved it to the XXL50 like last week. So you can see him plucking and eating it out of the way. So hopefully after a couple of months, he'll actually get a really big dent into it. We tried some of the nudibranchs, the Bergia, and I don't know, they just really didn't work for us.
No, and there's wrasses in that tank too that we'd have to pull out. So you just kind of, there are some nudibranchs still in there, and maybe behind the scenes they're doing a little bit of work, but
it's not solving.
Not taking a massive dent out of it.
Yeah, Frank's F Aptasia actually was one of the things that we worked really well, and I have had mixed results with trying to kill Aptasia using, like Aptasia X seems to spread it for me. The Kelkwasser slurry tends to like knock it back, but the same Aptasia, little bits of it comes back. So that F Aptasia, I don't know, I told Jason to bring it in. I don't know if we have it yet, but what it does is creates a cake that goes over it, and then after a few days you can either blow it off or just let it stay there, and Korallen will grow over it. But it creates this cake of, like, it looks like Kelkwasser still has that elevation of pH, but it crusts on there, and you can kill whole sheets of it. So that is something that we've been doing too, but hopefully that fish in there is actually, he did a really good job on the 160, so hopefully he will mow it down here, and that'll be our solution to this problem. Okay, so the other pest problem though that we had was also dinos. So we ran this multiple times in that tank. Probably related to the brand new dry rock and not really appreciating how hard that is with a bare bottom and respecting that whole process.
Yeah, and then we followed that, the dino flagellate cure process that we did in the 5-minute guide on this tank. So we blacked it out for a few days, ran a UV sterilizer, and we ended up having to go through that process a couple times before finally we just installed a permanent UV sterilizer. But dino problem eventually worked itself out, but part of the growing pains of a brand new bare bottom tank.
Yeah, so the solution to that in that case was definitely the blackout kind of kicks it back for a little while, but won't solve the problem in most cases. The competitive bacteria like the Microbacter 7 or even clean, I think 7 is a more common one for that, is that also competes with the dinos and other things and creates a competitive environment for surface area. But in our case, the UV sterilizer was the solution. That was the end game solution, that we put it on there as a treatment, and just kind of like hang it next to the tank. It was kind of ugly, but it was just a temporary solution. And it would always kick it back. When we put it on permanently, the dinos are gone. And the form that was populating our tank are no longer a problem, and ever since we stuck it on there permanently, it just isn't a thing. So pests though, those dinos form that slime and just crud in the tank, cloud the tank, and the corals just don't like it. There could be toxins produced from it.
Yeah, it can get stuck on it. You see some of that stuff stuck on the branches of your SPS there, and then eventually chokes out some of those places. So now you just got raw skeleton there. It gives more opportunity for more dinos to grow. Makes them just look bad too, but they're just not happy.
So there's no question that the dinos are setting the tank back, and now that we've solved it with the UV, I don't think that will ever be a problem, and so we're just not going to have to worry about that anymore. All right, number 8 is actually pretty interesting, because this is like the heart of the hybrid method of mixing methods that work at home or an office environment with a production environment. So at WWC, they don't really believe in controllers a whole lot. They do have some monitors around, but they have people there 7 days a week, taking care of the tanks. They're super in tune with the tanks. Here, nobody's here in the weekends. Nobody's here at night. Like at home, you're probably going on vacations and away for a period of time. So, having real-time monitoring the tanks is actually super valuable. And I can tell you right now, it has saved both of these tanks multiple times with simple problems like the cleaners closing my door here, which causes this room to get actually really hot or cold depending on the time of the year, because the thermostat isn't that great in here. So really simple solutions to simple problems is just let me know about the problem so I can go solve it. But that monitoring has actually failed us differently in different ways in each one of these tanks.
Yeah, and that is the biggest one difference here is what those fails were. So in the 750, it was we just didn't have the monitoring on. It was
The power monitor.
Yeah, the power monitoring, the heartbeat. So we didn't know, when the Apex was connected to the internet or not. So when the power went out, we didn't get an alert that Apex is not, that our Apex isn't talking to the internet. And had we had known and got those heartbeat updates, we probably could have got in here a lot sooner, saved a bunch of fish. But the GFCI outlet failed, tripped, and we lost fish.
So that was a totally avoidable failure on our end.
Yeah.
We just didn't turn that thing on,
Yep.
the heartbeat monitor. It's on this tank and all the other ones. For some reason, it just didn't get turned on that one. If it did, the moment that thing tripped, all of a sudden we would have got email saying, go do something by it. We'd come here, turn the thing back on,
Yeah.
and no losses. But instead, man, really sad event. We lost a whole bunch of fish. And it was another hiccup for that tank. So this one actually had a different type of problem.
Yeah, it wasn't the monitoring fail per se. It was just our choice of products for dosing. So specifically in this case, we were dosing sodium bicarbonate instead of soda ash. And so when an overdose happened, you walked into the office, it was just completely white cloud. Had we had chose something that would trip an alarm or make the monitor go off or give us a notification, if we would have chose soda ash, we would have got pH, updates saying, hey, your pH is off balance, something's going on here, it's spiked. Same thing if we had a Trident or something, that we would have seen the alkalinity go up. But because we chose sodium bicarb, it really didn't have a way to trigger one of those, we walked into a fail.
So as I recall, we selected the bicarb because we were trying to do that Tropic Marin BRS Hybrid, which can also be done with soda ash. And so I just didn't think about it. It's been so long since I'd used bicarb as a additive that I won't get an alarm now if I overdose because the pH won't be elevated.
Right.
So that day we switched it. So it's now soda ash again. Obviously, I think actually switching to the soda ash increased the pH of the tank and actually increased the results as well. So or growth rates. I'm pretty happy with switching, but also now if the thing ever overdoses again, all of a sudden we now have a pretty instantaneous solution because we use pretty slow dosers on this tank, so you'd be able to go tell right away. But it was scary. This is an important thing here because I walked in there in the morning, the whole tank was white, and I think we dumped like a half a gallon of alkalinity solution into the tank, right? I thought the tank was done. And it was so sad because we're like, this tank is going places, right? It's a small tank, but it's really cool all the same. And so it was really sad, but luckily we know what to do here. And in this case, what I did is drain the thing all the way down. And then I took water out of the XXL 750, which interestingly enough didn't give us aptasia in this tank now that I recall the choice. But we drained the 40 some gallons of water out of there and put it in here and then just did a water change on that one, added new fresh water. So I had, stable water that is cured and, it wasn't rapidly mixed up. The temperature is right. And we changed it out rapidly. And if you follow my Facebook, you would know that it had no hiccup.
Yeah.
We didn't have any mortalities, we didn't lose any color, we didn't have any problems. And so this, I think, is the result of a tank that actually is thriving. The difference between just surviving and thriving means when you do have hiccups, the tank is capable of working its way through it.
Yeah.
If the tank was already stressed out, I think you would wipe it out.
Yeah.
So to be honest, if that had happened to the XXL 750, I think we would have seen a ton of mortalities.
Just another setback on top of other setbacks.
Yeah, the tanks are the corals are just not, they don't have all those energy reserves and they're just not as healthy. There's just not as many, compounding stresses. So here's the thing. I don't think there's anything that we're going to do differently now to the monitoring, but I'm going to tell you right now that neither of these tanks would be here today if we were not monitoring them and coming in when it tells us that there's an actual problem. So number 9 is actually something Randy brought up today, and I think is spot on and real close to what we just said.
Yeah, it's just a big difference between the two is just water volume in general. And smaller tank being smaller water volume, changes happen a lot faster, which makes it easier to monitor. So, if a change in pH happens, it's not I can I can figure it out right away with this tank, because it could be even just a small addition to soda ash or something like that. If my calcium reactor kind of went on the fritz with the 750, or I was overdosing kind of the same thing, probably it takes longer for me to get that alert, because it's larger water volume and it's going to take longer for it to actually affect the water itself.
So there's another thing within this too, is this smaller tank, I can actually stay in tune with each one of these corals a lot more than a tank full of 150 corals,
true. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I can look at each one of these and I can sense when something's going wrong with them much sooner and act on it. So even though it's a smaller water volume and actually the problems happen faster, because it's smaller, I'm more in tune with the tank, and like we can see a solution or problem and a solution to it much faster. All right, number 10 is actually the fundamental difference between a smaller tank and a bigger tank.
Yeah, and that is smaller tanks fill out faster, look fuller, more complete after the corals even reach mini colony size, versus this 180-gallon tank where you take this same size coral, you put it in there, still leaves you kind of hoping for more.
Yeah, there's no question that a baseball-sized coral in a small 40-gallon tank looks about 3 times smaller than or larger than it does in a 180-gallon tank.
That's true.
Right? There's no question about it. However, these corals are unquestionably much larger than they are in that tank. In fact, Josh asked me if he could clip out of it the other day, and I told him to hold off just for a second because I want to figure out a way to get them to you guys. So I haven't figured it out yet, but we'll probably do a contest or something in the future where you can win some corals actually out of this tank. So stay tuned. If you've got ideas on how you do it, let us know. But there's no question about it. Like if you want to fill out a small tank, it's just much easier. It happens much quicker in a small tank than it does in a big tank. So one of the reasons why this tank looks so epic, and that one still looks like it's growing out. All right, so as always, if you only heard one thing, let it be this.
Yeah, for me, that's the pest problem, and avoiding it at all costs. There's so many corals and temptations and things I want. I want coralline algae in there right now, so I'm going to go scrape it from an established tank already that may or may not have aptasia. It doesn't look like it, but you can just avoid that stuff up front. And what a small problem, or maybe even not be a problem in the beginning, doesn't turn into a massive setback in the future.
All right, so for me, I got 3 rapid fire. Okay. Respect the difference between established live rock and dry rock. They are different, especially if you're going bare bottom. There are all kinds of bacterial solutions that can help progress the tank faster, but you can also just have a little bit of patience. Either way, respect that. Also, respect the difference between your different lighting solutions. This option of T5s and the Kessel in this case, but probably any LED, really just produces plug-and-play results. Anybody can produce a tank like this. It was really simple. You don't have to be a pro. If you're going to use LED lighting only, respect all of that adjustability that gives you a spectrum, spread, raising and mounting heights, as well as the par intensity sliders. I would definitely check out Randy's Investigates for your specific light, but also use the meter to tune it and install it correctly to get the right results, because you don't want to be struggling or just wondering whether or not that was the problem. And 3, I've just been leaving a lot of progress on the table by not trying different new solutions in some cases, and KZ was one of them. So, respecting the nutrition required for the coral that goes beyond just light actually has paid off in significant results in every tank that we've tried it in. So really, man, if it isn't KZ, think about the Brightwell Coral Amino, which is a little more affordable, but think about all those building blocks of protein and energy and all the elements that the corals require, and it will pay off in results. All right, so if this is your first interaction with that BRS WWC Hybrid series and you want to produce a tank like this one, right here is the link to the beginning of that playlist, and you can learn it all.